So, Be'ezras Hashem, we continue Torah Zayin, and we learned yesterday in the first column about the energy of Geulah, and how Geulah is connected to the concept of Nisim and Tefillah and freedom. Freedom in terms of how we look at the world, how we look at ourselves, how we look at circumstances, situations, whether things are stuck, right? And a teva mechayev kach, and nature is very definitive, and things are what they are, or whether we believe that tefillah can absolutely shatter nature. And that's, again, a very strong belief that Am Yisrael have, a belief in Nisim, a belief that there have been times when HaKadosh Baruch Hu has entered into His creation and changed the world, because there is a mechadesh, right? Sheyam and sheyesh mechadesh, ubiyada lechadesh davar k'rtzaynai. And that's the energy of Geulah. And then the Rebbe said, therefore, and the primary place for this Geulah consciousness will of course be Eretz Yisrael, right? Eretz Yisrael is the place where a person can merit to this awareness. And then Rebbe Nachman had said that because Avram Avinu had, in some sense, blemished this inyan of Emunah, specifically by asking a question requiring a proof that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to indeed gift his descendants with the land of Eretz Yisrael, which is itself a little bit of a blemish in Emunah from the standpoint of needing a proof instead of just accepting it, right? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu said He's giving you Eretz Yisrael, so accept it and carry on. So because of that, Chazal tell us that Avram Avinu's descendants are going down to exile. Which of Avram Avinu's descendants go down to exile? The 12 Shvatim. The 12 Shvatim is connected to the 12 Nuschais of Tefillah, right? Because Tefillah is going to be in exile, in a certain sense, if a person's Emunah is incomplete. And they go down to Mitzrayim. What's Mitzrayim? Mitzrayim, like we said, is the opposite of Eretz Yisrael. It's a land of constriction, right? Not a land of Eretz Yisrael. It's Eretz Toiva'u, Rechava, where it's a wide, right, in every sense, metaphorically, from the standpoint of being a land that enables a person to break free from the constriction of being stuck by circumstances, right? And Mitzrayim is Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is very constricting, and that's why Moshe Rabbeinu needs to go outside of the main city, the capital, in order to daven, because Mitzrayim nasim lekrasei, right? Nisim are very distant from Mitzrayim. Then the Rebbe explained that this is pshat in Ein Mashiach ben David ba Ella at shetichla prutam nakis. The Rebbe said that there are two tahaimos. Tahaim is a depth, but tahaim also means to be in shock or wonder, right? And that's the concept of a nes, right? But tehaim kaleir, and there's nisim ilayin, there's nisim tatayin, upper miracles, lower miracles. And the Rebbe told us that there's a malach, right? The Gemara tells us there's a malach that looks like an egla that stands in between these two tahaimos, and prita sivase, and his mouth is open. Said the Heilige Rebbe, the egla is the bechin of igulim, which we went into a little bit yesterday, right? The inyan of circles, the inyan of magin mirashis achris, the concept of harabayis, Yerushalayim harim, savivla, and we learned about this idea of Emunah being HaKadosh Baruch Hu's master plan, where it's all one, and the beginning melts into the end, and the end melts into the beginning. No, it's tchilas and b'seifa, but tchilas, as the Sefer Yitzir tells us, everything is all connected. And that's the concept of the egla, which is igulim, uprita sifasei. We said that that's the concept of prayer. Like it says, adni sifasei tiftach. Its mouth is open because it is klalias hanisem, and therefore it is the symbol for prayer because it connects, it stands between the two tahaimais, and that's the two tehaimais, right? The two wonders, the miracles, the upper and the lower miracles, and therefore its mouth is of course going to be open, which is a reflection of the energy of prayer, of tefillah. So if that aspect of prita sivase is the aspect of tefillah, as it's alluded to in its association with this egla, which is again igulim ve'emunascha savivaisecha. So then, says the Rebbe, that's the deeper meaning of tichla pruta menakis, because pruta is going to be a symbol for prita sivase, which is tefillah, right, in this context. Pruta is tefillah, and acha tichla pruta menakis, what's kiss? Is a kisui, is a concealment. So what does it mean that pruta is in the kiss? Right? It means that people can't daven. It means that people don't have emunah, nisim. Right? People are stuck, and people are willing to explain away all kind of miraculous occurrences by saying, no, it's nature, and they'll find some way of saying that it was natural and it wasn't a miracle at all. That's called pruta in a kiss. Right? The tefillah is covered over. When shetichla pruta min a kiss, said the Rebbe, ukshetichla zais v'tisrab emunah ba'olam. Right? A Mashiach's coming, like we've been learning, is a process, and bit by bit, the more that we individually are awakening our spark of Mashiach, right, by recognizing that we can free ourselves from this constricted mindset of Mitzrayim, we can break free, we can get to our own Moich in the Eretz Yisrael, we can get in our own internal states, we can get to a place of Eretz Yisrael consciousness. Through that, bit by bit, spark by spark, Mashiach is coming, right? And Mashiach consciousness is spreading in the world. That's what we had learned yesterday. Then the Rebbe had said that in order to have Emunah, you need to have Emes. These two things need to be together. Right? Emunah without Emes is blind, right? It's like to say blind faith, which Judaism doesn't really have, right? There's an aspect of Emes that comes together with Emunah. There's an aspect of critique and self-assessment and honesty, which needs to come into Emunah. Otherwise, we're always talking about Taras Emes, but if we're blind, to every indicator that actually we need to course correct in some sense, and we refuse to do so in the name of Emes, well, that's not really Emes, is it? So and that's like, it's a constant process of progression from the standpoint of how our emunah unfolds and flourishes from era to era, taking in new information, recognizing the parameters of a new age, and at the same time being tethered, to the past. And this is the constant dialectical dance between past and future that Am Yisrael has always been. It's Beis Shammai, it's Beis Hillel, it's Rebbe Shmuel, it's Rebbe Akiva, coming all the way down. It's the Baal Shem and the Vilna Gaon, coming all the way down. It's Rav Kook and the Satmar Rav, it's always this sort of tension between staying the way that things were, but the realization that as circumstances unfold, we absolutely must adapt, right? Or else you adapt or die, like in businesses. And figuring out how to do that while maintaining the connection to the Messiah and to the authentic spirit of Yiddishkeit is a very difficult, delicate process indeed, and that's how Kehal Yedidim unfolds, and ultimately it's the people who matter even more than the leadership, ultimately, in this sense, right? Because B'nai Nevi'im, and I would say that in a certain sense the people impact the leaders even more than the leaders impact the people, and you see that in many, many different ways, and that is not a calculation, that's a prophetic spirit. That's a prophetic spirit that works within the people. And like Hillel said, B'nai Nevi'im, and Am Yisrael know where to go. And the different chalakim of Am Yisrael know how to navigate, and ultimately the leaders follow suit. And then the leader's job is to rein in and to create the boundaries. But it's a constant, again, dialectical dance and a give and take, which is very important between Emunah and Emes. And people who are more on the Emunah side ought to recognize that there's place for the Emes people, and the people on the Emes side ought to know that there's place for the Emunah people, and then everybody's relaxed and it's fine, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan unfolds as long as there is, again, balance. Emunah and Emes and Emunah, that's when it's called Emunah, when there's Emes. And the way that we learned it is Igulim and Yosher, right? The Mem and the Samach Shebeluchos, which is going to come up actually later on in the lesson. Hopefully, maybe we'll get to it today or tomorrow. The Mem and the Samach, there's a concept of circles, which is the concept of Harbais, but there's also a concept of the square, right? Which is Har Sinai, right? And there are these two energies that need to be balanced in order for this to be the way that it needs to be. Who is the person who gives a person the consciousness of balance? Is the tzaddik, right? Is the Rebbe. It needs to be a consciousness of synthesis, and like we've been saying from the beginning, Rebbe Nachman's whole thing is the Amud Yomi is always the balance. It's the essence of the Jewish consciousness, right? Which is not to either side, but is as much as possible in the center. So now we continue with Ois Gimel. The only way that a person can really be Zoicha to Emes, to a kind of Emes that's going to fill one's Emunah with real content instead of it just being fluff, right? But it should be Mamish Emes, is only through Eskarvus to Tzadikim. V'yelich v'derech hatzasam, and to go in the path of their guidance. Which the Rebbe's, the whole thing is guidance, like he has a whole sefer, Likutei Moharan, which is a collection of all the practical advice. When a person is receiving the wisdom and the consciousness of tzaddikim, nechgak by emes. Emes becomes etched into that person's heart. Hein emes chafatzta, you desired emes. That kisha'ata chavetz emes batuchais uvesasam chachma seidieni. You need to access chachma that comes from batuchais, which he's going to learn. It really means like a very hidden place of a sasam. deep inside of a person, Chochmah Saidi'eni, Rebbe Nachman's going to learn that that's an aspect of the kidneys. The Batuchais is an aspect of the kidneys deep inside of a person's physiognomy, like a person's physiological structure. Deep inside, that's where Chochmah comes forth, as we're going to see in a minute. And the Rebbe says the most incredible thing. It's a bit of a radical thing to read. But the Rebbe says this: He says a person who receives advice from tzaddikim is a marriage. You're impregnated by the tzaddik, in a certain sense. And the same is true, chas v'shalom, for the opposite. Because a person's always interfacing with the world. A person's always impacted by different tendencies. The question is, where are those things coming from? And a person has to be very careful, because it's an impregnation one way or another. A person gives you an idea, it's planted inside of you, and then it begins to flourish because it comes into contact with all the other impulses, right? And it's not monolithic. You're not having one input and then basing your whole life off of that. It's always an integration, like a tapestry of many different ideas. But we know that even the smallest deviation at the outset can end up miles and miles and miles away later on. And that's why a person has to be very careful with where they're getting their guidance, right? And ultimately, a person needs a connection to a tzaddik, right? And especially if you can have a connection to a tzaddik who, like we've already demonstrated, clearly had some kind of otherworldly connection, so then you're good. Then you have a skashus to tzaddikim. You're connected to people who are connected to tzaddikim, as long as we're plugged into a holy source. Right? So he says that's the aspect of Nisuin B'Klipa. How do we know that? From the Nachash. Because it says HaNachash Hishiani. Right? The Chava said the Nachash led me astray. The Nachash tricked me. And says the Rebbe, it's Lashon Nisuin. Hishiani. I was saying switch the shin for a sin, and it means the Nachash married me, which of course we know. There was Bia. There was an aspect of Bia, right, with the Nachash. And Chava, right? Bach Nachash al Chava v'hitel bazuama. There was some aspect of a Nisuin. All right? So Nachash Hishiani. She was like, in a sense, married to the Nachash, right? There was a bechin of Nisuin. Right? And through this Nisuin, Chazal say Hetel Bazuama, there was a little bit of a zuama, of a filth, right? That was invested, that was inflicted within Chava. And again, just like impregnation, that leads to a child, right? Meaning something develops. It's just a germ, it's just a seed, right? It's a seminal drop. From there, something happens. Now, when did this zuama that she was receiving from the Nachash, which is the aspect of advice from Rishayim, when did that stop? It stopped by Har Sinai. So we know that the zuama ceased when they stood at the foot of Har Sinai. Kisham kiblu tarag atin de kedusha, says the Rebbe. You know why? Because the Nachash that gave her the Eitzah, right, the Sitra Achra, which is the impregnation to the Rishayim, was counteracted by the 613 mitzvahs, which are called in the Zohar Kadosh 613 pieces of advice. Taryag atin de araisa, taryag atin de kedusha, 613 holy pieces of advice. And then they were able to counteract the prior influence that they were under, which is the Atzas HaYetzer. We say Atzas HaYetzer is the advice, the Eitzah of the Yetzer Hara, and instead they were able to receive the Eitzah of Kuchabrichu. They were able to receive, right, the guidance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is saying, listen, 613 ways, right, 248 ways to get close to me by doing certain things, 365 ways of getting close to me by withholding from certain things. But these are pieces of advice. These are Eitzahs. These are Eitzahs. V'lama nikra Eitzah bebechinas right. V'Islam nisuin bekedusha. V'lama nikra Eitzah bebechinas nisuin. Why is a piece of advice connected to the concept of intimacy, of marriage? So we already learned on a simple level, because metaphorically it becomes implanted within a person, and then it develops into what it develops, right? Much like an intimate union between a husband and wife. So he says a little bit of a deeper thing, because the Gemara in Bracha says, which is what I referenced before, Eitzahs come from kloyos, right? It's in a person's kishkas, we say, a gut feeling, right? It comes from the kidneys, somewhere deep inside, right? It says that by Avram Avinu, right? His kloyos turned into two, sprouts and taught him the whole Torah. It came from the kloyos. and we know, if not necessarily on a physiological level, science hasn't gotten to that yet. Or I'm not quite sure whether this is actually true according to our physiological or understanding of our physiological functioning. But on some metaphysical level, at least spiritually speaking, the kidneys have some. We have to ask some doctor if this is true, But apparently, with the kidneys, at least metaphysically, and it doesn't have to be published on every level. Ayin and the Ramchal and Adar Bamarim is a phenomenally important piece, and people have written whole books on Torah and science, pages and pages. And the Ramchal, in one tiny paragraph, just undoes the whole thing. He says Chazal did not come to say anything about science. He says when Chazal commented about science, they were commenting on the Kabbalistic energies that underlie the physical world. And he says, therefore, there's no steer at all. That we're never talking about science, and he demonstrates this very clearly, and that's it. You have Pnimius Atayra, there's no steer, there's no question, because you understand the Chazal, we're speaking on so much of a loftier level. But if you deny Pnimius Atayra, that's mamash stira, because they were talking about the physical world. The physical world doesn't look to be that way, and all of a sudden there's a tremendous conflict. And that's how Said very, very sweetly and gently just takes us out of so many issues, in so many issues. And sefer Adar Bamarim. I'll post I've written about this in the past and posted about it, but I'll send a picture. It's a very, very important piece. Very important piece that's become famous. Actually, I've seen it quoted elsewhere. It's a bit of an obscure source, like smack in the middle of a sefer, but it's very, very powerful. Very powerful. Okay, so we don't know again whether this is mamash true. Somebody will chat GPT it. It's not even Google anymore. Just chat GPT it later. And make sure to click the search thing so it gives you the websites. Then you can know which websites fooled you. Then you can know where it's getting the sheker from. So he says it's klei lada, right? He says the kidneys have something to do with the production of the substance, right? That's causing birth, right? Klei azera, which again we know that comes from a different part of the body, but spiritually speaking, it's connected to netzach and haid, right? And that's why there are two, right? Because the two sources of the zera. Ultimately, so says the Rebbe Nachman, we know that the same klayos that are producing Eitzah are producing Zera. Right? So in some sense, these two things are connected. Again, whether or not that's physically true is not relevant. Okay? In a spiritual sense, this is absolutely true. Nimtza k'shemekablim Eitzah me'adam, says the Rebbe, when you receive Eitzah from a person, not a simple thing, ki lemekablim mimena Zera. He says you are receiving from this person Zera. This is an intimate moment of connection, which is of course why eitzahs have to be given over with such yira and charada, because it's a massive thing. A person gives bal eitzah, people come to speak to a person. It's not simple, because it's a bechina of intimacy. You have to be very, very, very sure and careful, and very humble, unless you're like a navi. And that's why also all this time a person who's giving advice, even Rabbeinu HaKadosh, even Rebbe Nachman, it's brought in Chaim around that he would never ever tell people what to do. Right? You can never tell people what to do. What you can do is talk through something. You can tell a person what you would do, and you preserve bechira. You can never tell a person what to do, right? Because what do we really know? Unless mamish a person's like a navi, But it says in Chaim Moharan very, very explicitly, Rebbe Nachman would never tell a person what to do. Right? He would talk you through the sugya, and that's what a real Rebbe is. A real Rebbe is not somebody who's telling you every second. A real Rebbe is somebody who's talking through an Indian, teaching you how to think, giving you the confidence to be able to make decisions, to allow the Kehal Yedidim to flow down through your bechira, not his bechira. That's a very deep thing.
Okay.
Very deep thing.
Is implanting an idea.
Implanting, yes, planting. The concept also zera, from that standpoint, right? An idea becomes implanted, and then it flourishes, and then it extends, and then it unfolds, and that's mamash true, right? So he says, nimtza, it's a wild thing. Kishem mekablim eitza me adam ki ilu mekablim mimenu zera va'akolafia adam imrasha tzadik. Who are you, being intimate in this way with? Right? Where are we getting the input from? A rasha, from a tzaddik. Ubishvil zen, therefore, atar matish kayach. The Torah makes a person weak, right? In the same way, it's making a reference in the same way that zivug, right, is matish koycha shel adam nikra tushia, and it's called an eitzah. The Torah is called an eitzah. Li eitz of a sushia, kim taryag atin kamashikazav. Li eitz of a sushia. It's pieces of advice, and that's how the Torah counteracted the Torah counteracted the giving of the Torah, counteracted the atzas hanachash, because what that did is that ultimately it went and it counteracted the investiture of the Nachash into Chava, and therefore Paskazu Amasa. Because that investiture of the Nachash was actually its really bad advice, right, to go against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And over here they stood at Har Sinai, Paskazu Amasa, because they were receiving a brand new influx of Eitzah, right? Like Shekasav Eitzah V'Sushia. The Eitzah same b'Makayim Nisuin, and again, Eitzahs are in the place of Nisuin B'china Zivug, B'china Zivug Amatish Koyach, right? Just like Chazal say, that a Zivug, right, that experience of intimacy, that is Matish Koyach Shaladam, that makes a person weak. And also learning Torah makes a person weak, right? And it's the same inyan. It's the same inyan of a person who's in the bechina of receiving zera. But the advice of the tzaddik is called kula zera emes. It's absolutely pure. It's absolutely from kedusha, and that's the advice of a tzaddik. I have planted a shoot or a root, like a small plant. And this is a reference to Pasuk Yirmiyahu, but if you look in the Mefarshim, it's a reference to the Geulah, B'chinas Geulah. K'may shekasav. And not just on a simple level is it a reference to the Geulah because that's the aspect of what the symbolism is, but even deeper, the Pasuk in Zayin says, Esher kalahem v'akabtzem, I'm going to whistle and kabtzem and gather together all the Yidden. And that word Esherka, which over there is literally a call for kibbutz galiyas, is the same letters, right, as Sayrik, right, Esherka and Sayrik. The same, by the way, it's the same Indian what he already did with Hanachash Hishiani and Hisiani, right? I mean, it's just changing the sin and the shin, which is very deep, and Jeremy, I'm sure, is going to go on a whole thought journey now with the shin and the sin, right? And these two things, apparently, they keep on showing up, right? And if you're learning Ian, so you focus on those. It's Lashon Rabbeinu. So every detail is very, very important. Very important. We're not going to do that now. But Esher Kalahem va'akabtzem. Right, so there's a connection between the Sayrik and the Esherka. Va'akabtzem al yidei ma. So the pasuk continues al yidei kula zera emes. Through this, that a person is receiving input and guidance from kula zera emes. So ma kesher to the Geulah, because the Rebbe said that the whole Geulah is talian muna. And how do you have a muna? When you have emes with it. Otherwise, it's not. It's what do you believe in? It's like a person can believe in any number of things. How do you make sure that your faith is anchored in the appropriate context, right? Meaning to say, there's always going to be an aspect of emunah in Yiddishkeit, right? Always. There are things that we're not going to be able to understand. Rav Nassan has beautifully in the beginning of the halachas, there are two parts to the night. There's a part where we're pashat sleeping for, and then there's a part where we wake up and do tikkun chatzais for, which is a mituk, right? But there's two kinds of din. Like there are questions that are unanswerable. You just got to sleep, right? Rav Nassan says you have to put yourself into sub or super consciousness where you don't have any answer. That's the bechina of silence, shtoikak, ala b'machshava, the bechina of ayidam arin, and so on. Right, and that's the aspect, mamish, of keser, of rising through silence, like we learned siyag l'chachma shtika taravav, of going to a place of mamish shtika. And that's the first part of the night. And then there are inyanim where you could answer, but again, it requires emunah. We don't really understand the master plan. We don't really understand anything. But the question is, what do we know? Right, what I call it, I call MS is the jumping board of a swimming pool. Right, emet, like meaning, all the faiths are jumping into a place of not knowing, right? Meaning everybody ends up in the pool of emunah, meaning the realization and the recognition of the limitation of the human mind, and so on. But the contours of that emunah, the parameters of that emunah, have everything to do with which diving board you jumped off, right? And that's MS, meaning how do I associate and identify which is the appropriate diving board using my rationality to figure out through MS how I can be guided to know which diving board to jump off of into that realm of Amunah, right? And that requires, Hashem gave us a brain, where there is reasoning that we can do. Now again, the fact that ultimately the human being doesn't know anything, and doesn't change the fact that I have a brain that can make its best estimation of the truth, but what it does do is provide that process with tremendous humility. Doesn't change anything. A person can still believe strongly what they believe, but it means that whatever they believe is already in the context of faith. I've given SHIURIM about this also in our Thursday night series in the past, and this is this interpolation between MS and Emunah and MS. But ultimately, a person who has this bechina of MS means that their Emunah is mamish, strong and real, and a person believes in Nisim, for example, right? That's mamish. That's the aspect of real Yiddishkeit, to believe in Nisim. Otherwise, if you just believe in this like concept of God and all the Nisim are metaphors, like people like to say, and we've lost that tradition of mythology, and now people take it seriously. And no. Yiddishkeit took it seriously, always. We believe in events. We believe, and this is Yisoidei Emunah Rambana and the Parshas Boy. Everything goes back to Yitzias. Everything goes back to Yitzias Mitzrayim. Shafta Mayim B'Sasan. Where's that even coming from? Ein Mayim Alatar. Right. So. Unbelievable. I think this might also have a leap, but both are true. This is Niglas and Nisters are both true. We mamish believe in miracles. You have to understand that we believe in Nisim, right? We believe in miracles, and that's the aspect of the jumping off of the diving board of Derech Yisrael Saba, of our Messiah, and then a person ends up in Emunah. But that's connected to the Geulah, because Geulah is connected to Emunah, and like we learned, you cannot have Emunah without MS. So therefore, go back to the pasuk. Esher kol ha'heva akabtim is a reference to the Geulah. How do you have Geulah through Emunah? And therefore, the end of the pasuk says Kula zera MS, because you can't have Emunah without MS. Can't have MS without Emunah. Al yedei asas hatzadikim tavila MS. Through the guidance of tzadikim, a person is zeicha to MS. Al yedei zeh nikris Emunah, and this is how it's called Emunah kades chaber ba MS. When you have connected with it MS. I just want to clarify what I said before about Rebbe Nachman not telling people what to do. Rebbe Nachman told everybody what to do, meaning Rebbe Nachman had tons of eitzas. What I was saying is he never forcefully put his opinion on you. He gave you advice, and I don't mean to say Chas v'Shalom Rebbe Nachman didn't give advice because he was scared to give advice. No, it means he wanted to preserve a person's bechira all the time. All the time. Right? Rebbe Nachman wanted a person to become a tzaddik. He said, "Kamoini mamish." He said, "You can become like me." He said, "Follow my path." And he was very strong on this. And this might be one of the differences between Chabad and Breslov, in a certain sense, because in Tanya they speak about the tzaddik. Ki'ilu, and it's always like a sugya. Can a person become a tzaddik? Do the tzaddikim have a completely different neshama? The Baal Tanya says if a person is zeicha, they can have the ibur neshama of a tzaddik, right? But it would seem that a person is not born in that state. And that a person is born in that state. And if you're a tzaddik, you're a tzaddik. And otherwise you're somewhere between. Most of us are. In the Tanya we're Shaim. And how they say halavaya beinani, which is a very different approach. And in Breslov, it's not like that. Rebbe Nachman made it super clear. He said, I don't want you to think that I became the way I became because I was born this way. He said, this has nothing to do with the fact that my great grandfather was the Baal Shem Tov. Nothing. He says, I worked for every inch that I have. I worked, I toiled, he said. And he said, most of it happened through tefillah. It's just prayer. And he went through, in his youth, he went through wild, crazy SHIURIM and the things, the avodas that he took on himself to crush the Yetzer Hara. He wouldn't swallow his food at age 6. He was taking food and shoving it all the way down his throat whole and swallowing it because he wouldn't have any hana. Understand the wild things that he was doing as a youth. And later on he said, now I realize I could have accomplished it all through prayer. I said I could have gotten to every madriga just through tefillah alone. Fine. But the Rebbe believed that we should have bechira, meaning he believed that we could make it on our own. So he didn't want to take that away. But don't make the mistake. The Rebbe gave lots of eitzas, and they're kula zera emes. And the question is whether we're willing to be mevatel, and we're willing to accept it. There's a piece in Sichas Ram which I've given SHIURIM on in the past, where the Rebbe says that people who are disconnected from the tzaddik are like a mishugayim, like a little bit insane people who refuse to accept the guidance of a sane person. He says, if you think of it, if there was a person who's fundamentally mishugos, fundamentally deficient from that standpoint, but they would resolve to following every single piece of guidance from a sane person, they can make it in the world like a sane person. Because what's the chilek, right? Meaning the question is, where's the input coming from? Says the Rebbe, if you'll only listen to me, I'm a sane person. I promise you, says the Rebbe. Not me for sure not. But the Rebbe says, I'm trying. But the Rebbe says, I'm a sane person. He said, I didn't come down into this world for any tikkun for my neshama, because he said my neshama is already whole, is already perfect. I came down just as a gift, to gift these messages to Klal Yisrael. If you follow me and you match my template, you'll be just like me, and then there will be no chilek. And then you'll live the life that you were supposed to live, and then everything will be exactly the way that it's supposed to be. That's what the Rebbe says. So that means that other than connection to tzaddikim, there's a certain mishagas. But the advice of a tzaddik is, like he's saying, is kula zera emes. Through this is the aspect of emunah kades chaber ba emes. When emes is connected to this, and this is how the Geulah is going to come. So in a certain sense, right, if you were to really summarize what we've learned thus far, it isn't just that the Geulah comes through emunah and emunah is connected to emes. Now he's saying another thing. The Geulah will come through a skarvus to tzaddikim. And that is what's missing today. want to really know the truth? More than anything else, there's no concept of true hiskarvus to a tzaddik in the standard world. Understand? A person can have a mariderech, a person has a rosh hashiva, they ask shailas, but a kesher nafshi with a tzaddik, right, who's providing a derech, or a person's mevatel themselves, where there's real eitzas that a person's listening to, generally speaking, the general consciousness, it's lacking. You have the Rav of your local Orthodox synagogue, and you have a good relationship with him, or whatever it is. But I'm talking about neflei savas chali kavas nashim. Rebbe Nachman says that your bond with the tzaddik, the relationship with the tzaddik, is something else. Something else. I think they say from the Tzemach Tzedek, one of the Lubavitcher Tzadikim, I think he said that if David HaMelech would have known, obviously he knew, but in a certain sense, the way that it unfolded through history, the love between a chassid and a rebbe, a real chassid and a real rebbe, it's got to be both, a real chassid and a real rebbe. He said David HaMelech never would have compared his love for Yaina's son to the Avas Nashim. He would have said, "Nefleis Avas Chali Ka'avas Chassid the Rebbe," because he said the love between a chassid and a rebbe is even deeper than the love between a husband and wife. That's the it's a bechina of nesuin. It's a bechina, and the Geulah depends on this consciousness, because it comes along with humility, and it comes along with bittul, and it comes along with everything you need, because then you're an open channel, and then, oh my gosh, you all the chaver here see, we're all mekusha to tzaddikim. You see what you've availed yourself. You see what you have access to, and many other people are not. They're not availing themselves this, and so the Geulah comes through this nekuda, which is the consciousness of the tzaddik, right? V'al yedei zeh taveh ha'Geulah. And through this comes the Geulah. Because we're receiving the drops, right? The bechina of the nitzotzos of zera, which is Eitzah, that we're receiving. V'zeu hein emes chafatzta. Rebbe Shalom, you wanted emes. Batuchai, says the Rebbe, b'kloyos Chochmah seidi'eni. So connect to the kula zera emes. Connect to the kloyos, which is mevashlim klei zera. Right, or the klei zera. She'ezka lekabel tipei hamoyach tipei haseichel ayidei Eitzah she'akabel mehem ba'az ezka le'emes. And then I'm going to be zoicha to emes. If I'm zoicha to sit in front of a tzaddik and in front of the sefer of the tzaddik, hasei lecha rav or knei lecha chaver, or both if you can, and primarily a person who's connected to the tzaddik, that's the ultimate, right? But hasei lecha rav, knei lecha chaver, Rebbe Nachman says knei lecha chaver, a kana is like a reed which they used to use to write sefer Torah. He says if you can't find a rebbe, right, so knei lecha chaver, and go to svarim. And the Svarim have everything you need. And the Rebbe, what the Rebbe wrote 280 whatever years ago, is so much more relevant from the standpoint of advice than most Lebedik Tzadikim. It's a living sefer. It's a living, vibrant countenance of consciousness. And it's all here. And so you can find it in the sefer.
There's a chibur.
Beautiful. Yeah. So, and more than that, if a person could have both, and you have the tzaddik, and you have a living mashpia, the best. Right? Then it's both. But as long as that person is mekusha to the tzaddik. Vaz eskala emes ki atipus seichel nikra kula zera emes. Says the Rebbe, nice daled vidash al yedei mitzvahs tzitzis ha'adam nitzah me'atzas ha'nachash. Another way of avoiding the eitzah of the nachash, right? A protective element to make sure that we are able to connect to the hasagas of the tzaddik and to stay away from the advice of the nachash. Minisun shal rasham bechinas niyuf, which is ultimately, in a sense, adultery, because our neshama always wants to be married, right, to the tzaddik, and that's the fundamental marriage, right? We're married to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ultimately, right, through the Torah Kedosh, V'yaminu b'Hashem. And over Moshe Avda, Moshe is like the Masada Kedushin, right? He's officiating between the marriage between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the role of the tzaddik. So a person is listening to the Atzas HaYetzer, to the Atzas HaNachash, that's Niyaf, that's adultery. Says the Rebbe, it's tzitzis. Ki tzitzis shmir l'niyaf. Because tzitzis will guard a person, as we know from Chazal, and Tikkun Zayar. Tzitzis will guard a person from Niyaf, right? The famous story where he was busy, right, going to Aveir, and the tzitzis hit him in the face, right? Tzitzis are protective. And here he brings from the Tikkun Zer Kamuva B'Tikkun V'yikach Shem V'yefes Es Asimla V'yisim Al Shem Shneim, right? That Cham had done something terrible, Pekama Bris, right? In the most literal sense, right? He mamash was poigim in the capacity of his father. He emasculated his father, right? He prevented Noach from being able to have any more children, which is very, very deep Inyan. Right, of course, obviously everything's very deep, but this is really very deep if you think about why Cham and what was going on and how. That's a Bechina Pagama Bris. Who was Masak in that? was Shem and Yafes. What did they do? They took a simla, they walked backwards, they covered their father, right, not to see the Geulah of Erva, and they walked out. And says the Tikkun Zayar, Zebechinas Tzitzis. He says that simla was tzitzis, right? And Chazal tell us that through that, right, they were Zaycha to tzitzis. The Erva Saviyam Loira'u, and they didn't see the Erva, ki tzitzis mechasen al aryon. Because the Zohar Kadosh says tzitzis is mechasen, it covers over. Tzitzis hangs down in that place, right? So a person, tzitzis is a huge shmira. It'll be a shmira if you allow it to be a shmira. If you believe that it's a shmira, so then all of a sudden you see the tzitzis and it's a shmira. If not, so then not. Yeah, and that's the same thing of going back to the beginning of what kind of consciousness do we have? Do we have a consciousness of nace, or do we have a consciousness of prutas and a kiss? It's the same Indian of whether or not tzitzis will work, is if you believe that tzitzis work. Mamish, you have to open your eyes. I wrote last night on my status, which I think is a very deep nekuda, and of course it was connected to our learning of Torah Zayin, is that I was learning the Mishnah in Megillah that tells us, it was very interesting, I was learning also in Gemara and Saita about that, and I opened my Mishnah, so my Seder Mishnah, it was the same exact Indian, which is always beautiful to see, but it was all about Birchas Kahanim, and that we cannot look at the hands of the thing, and there are all sorts of halachas, right? That even a person who has to take the shoes off, because in case the shoes are ripped, that's going to cause a person to look at the feet, and to look at the feet, that's going to cause them to look at the hand. And if you look at the hand, Rashi says, our enayim are chaos, right? It makes the eyes weak. And I was thinking about this, because every kid likes to peek and look at the hands, and nobody's blind. They tell you the scary story that once there was a kid who looked and got blind, but I know many kids who looked and didn't get blind. I'm probably one of them. So is everyone here. So what's the Indian, right? What's the Nakuda? And I want to say like this. I want to say, you know what it means? The Shekhinah is on the hands of the Kayin. All the while that you're afraid to look because you mamish believe that the Shekhinah is on the hands of the Kayin, then the Shekhinah is on the hands of the Kayin. Because there's wonder in your life, right? You're a person who's still awake to the thunder that we learned, right? To live in a world, in Torah, where a world is mamish bursting with meaning and magic. The second you look, your eyes grow dim. You know why? Because nothing happens to your eyesight. And mamela, your eyes grow dim. Because all of a sudden you think that it's not real. But it was mamish real. It was real if you believed it was real. The second you looked, you undid it. And it's like the wave function, the collapses. The second you look, it changes the Metzias. You looked, and all of a sudden, there's no Shekhinah there. See, there's no Shekhinah there. It did nothing to me. No. There was Shekhinah there. But you looked. And because you looked, all of a sudden your eyes grew dim. Because now you live in a world that's divested of its lights.
So you turn ha-teva, you take away the hey, it's just teva.
There's teva. Yeah. Right. Instead of seeing that miracle, you just see what it looks like on the surface.
I think R Yaakov says something very similar by the nun. It says that the Kodesh Baruch Hu got annoyed when the Yidden went out to look.
Yes, it's so interesting. Someone sent me a voice note saying that same thing. He quoted it from Rebbe Kalish, but apparently it's in our Chaim HaKadosh also. Beautiful. So this is
because there was Pishnai.
Yeah. It's not exactly the same Nakuda, but it's related. Okay, amazing. So why do we mention that? Because it's the same thing with tzitzis, right? Tzitzis will work if you believe they work. If you don't believe they work, they won't work. And it's true for everything in life. It's all about our subjective perception. We learned that with the Chevra, whoever was there, some of the Chevra pre-Chanukah, when we're learning the Likutei Halachas, right, about the Koach HaDimyon, and Amunah is connected to the Koach HaDimyon. It's very, very, very deep, right? Chalom, Lechem, this whole Inyan. Okay, fine. So that's the Inyan of Shem and of Shem and Yafes. Aval Cham duhu Yetzahara. So Cham, which is the Inyan of the Yetzahara, the Cham imkuv the Barnash Ba'aveira. That Cham is the Inyan of the body heating up, right? That's what we learned in Torah Vav, of the blood of the dam that's roseach, right? That's the bechina, like the Tanya says, of the chalal asmali shabalev, right? That nakuda of the place of the Yetzahara and the hot, warm blood and that Inyan who are. That's the aspect of Ar Kanan. Kamashikasav of Ar Kanan is cursed. Kamashikasav, you know who else it says it was cursed? The Nachash. Ar Atamikol Behema. That means the Cham is the aspect of the Nachash. Cham is the aspect of the Nachash. And in order to fix up what Cham did, you need tzitzis, right? And that's the simla that Shem and Yafes came and they covered it over with the simla. Says the Tikkun Zayar, that's the inyan of tzitzis, because that's what it is. It literally says, and that's how it goes. Right, and that's why tzitzis is a way to prevent a person from getting involved with the atzas anachash, which, like we're learning, is a bechina of arayis, is a bechina of niyuf. It says by Yosef Tzaddik that he was a beautiful child, Ali Ayin, right, above all eyes. And the Gemara says that he was lifted above Ayin Hara, that Ayin Hara wasn't Shailet. Bishvil Tzitzis. And he says that's because Yosef Tzaddik, who's a bechina of the opposite of Niyuf, right? That he's the bechina of the Tzaddik who's able to go ahead and to Vayanas Vayetze Achutza, to get out of that situation. That's the bechina of Tzitzis Lashon, because Tzitzis is a Lashon of looking. Meitzitz min acharakim, right? Tzitzis is meitzitz. Tzitzis means to look, to peer through the cracks. And that's the Indian I wanted to say also, a whole Torah about why it's important. The Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch says that tzaddikim are yafrit, or I guess it's a Rosh Tevis for tzitzis, tzaddik yafrit tzitziyosav tamid, right? That a person before he puts on his tzitzis should, after he puts on his tzitzis, or before really he puts on his talis, should be separating between all the strings. Yafrit tzitziyosav tamid. You have to separate them, and that's Rosh Tevis tzitzis. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch, right? Tzaddik Yafrid tzitziyosav tamid is Rosh Tevis tzitzis. What's the nekuda? Because tzitzis is lashon meitzitz min acharakim. You have to make sure that the cracks between your tzitzis are open. You have to make sure that they're not intertwined. Meaning you have to make sure that you're looking through the facade of a physical world to catch glimpses of Elokim beyond Hateva. So that's the inyan of tzitzis, because tzitzis is re'isa maisai. Tzitzis is connected to Yosef Tzaddik, which is the opposite of Niyuf, which is Ben Pairas Ali Oyin, because it gives you the capacity to see. Al Yedeze Zachal Ben Pairas. So then, so he's called Pairas. What's Pairas? It's Pruruvu, which is holy intimacy, because he was saved from the Eitz of the Nachash, which is Niyuf, and he's called Ben Pairas. Shenishma Minisuin Shal Nachash Mizivik Shal Asitra Achra V'Zachal Zivuga de Kedusha. And so he's zoichet the paskas u'amasam of the atzas ha'yetzer, atzas ha'nachash. He's zoichet the kabbalas ha'torah, which is li eitz of sushia, which is the bechina of paskas u'amasam. He's zoichet to the eitz of the tarag atin da'iraisa. V'zeh poiras is lashon zivag, lashon pru'uravu. Ve'ikra niyov tali b'nayim. Niyov is tali in the eyes. As the Gemara tells us, the eyes see and the heart wants. And then the Kleya Evarim are Goimer, right? But it all begins regarding the eyes. The Ikra Niyav Talib, and Kamasha Amr Shimshon Halach Achar Einav, right? Like it says by Shimshon Halach Achar Einav, Kamasha Kasav Aloisa Suru, Acharei Le Vavchem, the Acharei Nechem. Ushmir As Tzitzis, Shubachina Seinaim, because Meitzitz Min Acharakim, Ben Pairas Ale Oyin, who Shmir Me'atzas Hanachash. That's a way of staying away from the eitz of the nachash. And then a person becomes capable of receiving eitzes from the tzaddik, shu kula zera emes, which is the bechina of kula zera emes. That's the idea of tzitzis, of giving a person the capacity to look at the world in such a deep way where you see the tzitzis, but you're also able to look between them to a realm beyond. And you believe in the tzitzis, and so the tzitzis work. And a person lives with belief in Amunah, and a person isn't likely to be mechasa all the miracles in Teva, and to simply say that everything is just, just happenstance. The Bechina of Amalek, all right, which is mamish, the nachash, literally, is the Zohar Kadosh says the mamish, the Yetzirah, that Amalek is asher karcha baderech, right? We always say Amalek is cooling you off. Amalek is saying everything is mikra. Amalek is saying everything is keri. What's keri? Keri is a begam abris. Ma kesher to mikra keri, because it's the same thing, right? It's the eitzah of the nachash that causes a person to live a life of keri. What does keri mean, right? Fundamentally, it means that you don't really care about yourself very much, right? Or we don't care. Gewalt, keri. We don't care, all right? Meaning, also.
It's kariyot.
Oh, I thought you said kariot, the Shabbos cereal for my kids. I said, I'm sure that's also connected. Right, everything's connected. It's very, very deep. And kariot is mamish, a square. That's a bechina, Anyway, so kari is three mamish. So kari is the bechina of right, on a literal level, it means that a person really doesn't believe in the significance of physiological function, right? It means that it doesn't matter. And what do we know what matters or not? And I'm just going to say this because it's a shocking thing. Do you know how many potential babies there are in one drop of what comes out? I think billions or trillions, something like that. And who's to say that those drops don't have consciousness? I know that modern science believes that they don't. Those are human, right? Those sperm are human. They're human. And by the way, today with quantum, physics, or really even macro or micro, you can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. And just because we don't exist on that scale, it doesn't mean that they don't exist on that scale. And each and every one of them is if you zoom in far enough, is an actual entity that actually exists, that actually has movement. Because we don't think they have consciousness, because there's no real way to identify, that means that those things aren't conscious.
I know.
And that means that all of a sudden, a person is in a bechina of mikra. Mikra laila, it's called carry. Right? Why? Because it means that some deep part of you doesn't really believe in the significance of things. And this doesn't matter. So I'm not hurting anybody else. I'm not hurting myself. And again, everybody struggles with this. Person has to really... We live in a dar, this is the struggle. And every person needs to be, but to work on it, to care about caring, right? Meaning at least to be a person who's on the journey, who's, working on it, putting filters, whatever it is, every person needs to, to making, but all I'm saying is that it's hand in hand with this general approach to life, right? Which world do we live in? Which world do we live in? And this is the struggle. And so the Rebbe is saying that if a person has this nekuda of tzitzis, of shmir seinayim, this bechina of trying and being on the journey, I don't believe there's like purist, tikkun abris and everything else is begam abris. Rebbe Nachman says there are layers and layers and layers and layers of tikkun abris. Every person, wherever you are, is a bechina of tikkun abris, aside from the fact that you actually have a bris, whatever it is. But right now, and we're all part of the Am Yisrael and Kulam, and Ba'amech Kulam Tzadikim. All this is true. But there are levels and levels. A person has to make sure that they're trying to climb the ladder as best as they can. And if a person is in that state, then a person is able to stay distant from the bechina of the atzas nachash, able to have ben pyras is really pru revu in a holy way. Ali ayin is able to overcome the eyes, and the way to do that is very important tzitzis, right? But approaching tzitzis with emunah consciousness, and all this comes through the eitzah of the tzaddik who's trying very much to help us counteract the incredibly powerful atzas hayetzer, atzas nachash that we live in now, which is the bechina of Amalek. And Hashem should bless us with emunah consciousness. Hashem should bless us with a consciousness that really believes like childlike, that we ourselves as adults don't peek behind the talus to take a look at the hands of the kohen. Because mamish, the Shekhinah is there. People who believe in the Shekhinah, people who hear thunder and it's mavshet akmimi shebelev, we have to reclaim some of that innocence, reclaim some of that faith. And then tavayu to SHIURIM ereish amana. When all of humanity lives in that way, the world will get its magic back. The world will get its Shekhinah back. And then we'll be Zaycha to the Geulah Shleim of Bakar of Mamish. Thank you so much for joining us. Ashreinu, at this point it's not become Amud Yomi, it's Chatzi Amud Yomi, but we're doing our best. We're doing our best, Kalam Yomi, but it's Likutei Moharan Yomi, and that's the most important thing. So instead of rushing, we take it a little bit less, but we're still going through it, and we're going to do our best, B'ezras Hashem, but at that way, I personally think that it's a little bit more manageable, and Hashem should bless us to be able to bring in the eitzah of the tzaddik into our heart, that it should be Para v'rava, and we should shine with the light of the true tzaddik. Thank you so much for joining.